Attention all men's ministry leaders. We are excited to announce the first ever No Regrets National Leadership Summit, April 26th and 27th at Elmbrook Church in Brookfield, Wisconsin. This incredible 2-day summit will give you the strategies and tools needed to take your ministry to men to the next level. You'll hear from nationally renowned pastor, author, and speaker Steve Carter, along with Steve Sonderman and many of the seasoned leadership trainers of the No Regrets team. The National Leadership Summit is the perfect place to bring your entire team of leaders to hang out together, learn together, and envision the future of men's ministry at your church together. Register today and take advantage of our lowest pricing option beginning at just $89 per person. Don't miss the No Regrets National Leadership Summit, April 26th and 27th at Elmbrook Church in Brookfield, Wisconsin. For more information, visit noregretsmen.org and sign up today. We'll plan to see you in April. Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Well, welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. My name is Steve Sonderman, and it is so good to be with you again this week. And you know, with this podcast, we're seeking to equip you as a leader of men to more effectively minister to the men in your sphere of influence, whether that's in your family, at work, maybe you're leading a small group, you're a pastor of a local congregation. We hope that you'll be encouraged and equipped to more effectively do that. And we have a really special guest with us today, Nick Stumbo, the Executive Director of Pure Desire Ministry. And Nick's been with us before, and I just want to encourage you, if you want to hear Nick's entire story and maybe get some background to what we're going to be talking about today, you can go back and listen to the podcast that we did last year, a year and a half ago now, with Nick. Nick was also a speaker at the No Regrets Men's Conference a couple years ago. And so he is familiar with the ministry and has just an incredible ministry, and one that's vitally important to men today. And so, Nick, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Great to be with you and back on the podcast.
Yeah, well, it's been a little while since we've talked, and so why don't you just bring the listeners up to speed a little bit and tell them what's been going on with you, your ministry, your family, and anything else you want the guys to know?
Yeah, well, we were chatting a little bit before the episode. For my wife and I, this is our first year to have a kid in college. Our oldest daughter is down at Biola University, and so kind of adjusting to that life with a kid outside the home. And we were realizing I've been the executive director at Pure Desire now for 7 years, and in 7 more years we'll be empty nesters. And so for us, it's like that feeling of time is going by fast. How do we capture the moments with our kids? How do we take advantage of the influence we have before they're out of the home, and then learning about parenting and having influence for kids that are away at college is a new season. And I think helping us as a couple just to re-engage in our relationship in a deep way. So that's been a good season to walk through, financially challenging when you start to see college bills and loans and all that. But Pure Desire has been doing well. It's been an encouraging season. I think we really feel that last fall, maybe for the first time since COVID, that churches really have returned to kind of a new normal, where engaging with groups like Pure Desire is more common again. And we're up to 1,200 churches around the United States that have some form of a Pure Desire group. And so that's a high watermark for us as a ministry, and very encouraging. And one of the new resources I think we have out since the last time we talked, we recognize that a challenge for pastors and leaders in starting groups is they say, well, who can lead them? We want to have groups, but it's hard to know who's passionate about this subject. And usually the people that are passionate about it still have their own issues. And that's why they want, the group it's for themselves. Right. And so we developed an online group leader training course that any church or leader can utilize to walk someone through, we say soup to nuts. It's the A through Z of how do I lead a group? How do I start a group? What creates for a safe, confidential environment for group members, and all of that can be done through a self-paced course online. So we hope that's a valuable resource and tool for leaders to answer the question, how do we start groups if we don't have a leader? Well, you can raise one up. You can train some within your church. And with that, we developed a membership program as well, just to utilize a way that a church could be training a number of leaders at one time but doing it more affordably and in a more efficient manner. That's what our group membership system is about. And then the one other thing I'm very excited about is this year we have engaged with the Barna Group to conduct the largest study of Christians and churches around pornography use and attitudes about sexuality that has been done in the last 7 years. So the last one that came out through Barna was commissioned by Josh McDowell Ministries and had some incredible data points. I think that a lot of pastors, even if they haven't heard about the porn phenomenon or the report itself, if I use some of the stats, they'd probably say, well, I've heard that stat. And it comes from that study in 2016. Wow. And as you can imagine, a lot has changed since 2016. We've all gone through COVID. We've seen a whole generation of teenagers that, that Gen X that kind of grew up with smartphones and cell phones. They are now young adults. And what is that doing to relationships and marriages? And just unpacking a lot of the attitudes around pornography and what it's doing to relationships. So that's a report that will come out by the end of this summer here in 2024. And so we're excited about that, and hopefully to re-engage churches and leaders in that conversation of what's happening in my church and what can we do to help, because we're not powerless. This issue isn't too big for us. We can make a major difference in people's lives if we're just equipped in a couple of ways to lead people in this area. So all that to say, we hope the Barna report just helps a lot more pastors and leaders engage in this topic and creates the real motivation to do something for God's glory in this area and in the lives of men and women in the church that are struggling.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you're doing that with them. I mean, I just love every year they come out with a couple different reports, and they're so helpful, and they do such a great job. And I think something like this is going to provide sort of the why for pastors, because there'll be a lot of pastors, that's really not an issue in my church. But when you can bring out something like this and almost ahead of time knowing what the statistics are going to say, you can say, what, there is a problem here. You may not understand it, may not realize it, admit it, but your guys are struggling.
Yeah. And I'll give you a quick sneak peek at one question that was asked, and that I think, man, for me as a pastor, that would have been compelling to know. People were asked, who knows about your struggle with pornography? And, they were given topics like their spouse, their friend, a pastor, and then one of the answers was no one. And for people who answered that survey, 51% of people said, no one knows about my struggle. Mm-hmm. And so you would hope when you filter out the Christians that answered that response that they might do better. But among Christians that answered that question, 49% still said, no one knows that I'm struggling. Yeah. So I think about that as a pastor and say, wow, for every story that I have heard about, there's at least one more that I don't know about. Mm-hmm. And someone that has either never had the courage or the opportunity to be open about their struggle and face it. And that, I'd say as a leader, man, I want to be part of changing that number, because I don't want someone that's just silently suffering, trying to figure out this on their own, when the church, we're the community of God's people. Like, we're the place that it should be safe to say someone knows. And I'm not doing this alone. And yet still half our people would say, no one knows, and I'm doing this alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like you said, when that secret is revealed and a person tells someone else, that's half the battle right there. And just getting people the help that they need.
Yeah.
Nick, what is you look back since the last time we've talked, what would you say are some of the key learnings that you've had, whether it's personally or as a ministry, as it relates to ministry to men and helping guys with their struggle?
Yeah. I think the two areas that came to mind for me would be, number one, identity, and number two, access. So on the identity side, this really is a battle for the heart and the soul of men. And our identity as men, I think, is really under attack in our culture lately. I mean, we're seeing the war on toxic masculinity, and I think men can feel like they're facing it from both sides, that if they're too soft, they're criticized by one side, and if they're too firm or too strong, they're criticized in another way. And it feels like whatever direction I go, I can't win. Right. And so, and especially if a man's identity isn't firmly rooted in Christ on a daily basis, there are so many options to run to kind of find that identity. What does it mean to be a man? And pornography really becomes that answer for a lot of men, because in porn and in the world of lust and fantasy, we become whatever version of ourselves we think we need to be. If we think we need to be strong, we find ways of pornography that display strength and our manliness, and we feel accepted and wanted and desired. And if we want to feel more soft, there's ways of pornography that enforce kind of that I'm more taken advantage of, and that can tap into unmet needs. And so all that said, I think in this cultural landscape where we see kind of that understanding of men as a society is really under attack, pornography becomes this really attractive bug zapper light, if you will, that we can't get away from. And so I think it's so crucial that we come back to some of these core fundamentals of just who am I in Christ? What does it mean that God created me male in his image? And how do I live that out in a way that honors him? And the more firmly I'm rooted in that, the more resilient I am to the lure of lust or fantasy of pornography. I probably a lot of your listeners are aware of Jay Stringer and his book Unwanted. And one of the great things that Jay Stringer found in his research is that a man who lacks purpose is 7 times more likely to struggle with pornography. And I think purpose and identity, are so closely tied together.
Yeah.
That when we understand who we are in Christ, who God's made us to be, then purpose follows closely along with that. And if we feel a strong sense of purpose, we don't need the false allure of pornography. And so I think I just keep hearing identity coming up in so many conversations.
Yeah.
And then the other piece, more practical, I would just say is access. And the access that we have to pornography is unprecedented, and we are unprepared for the ways in which we can so easily access anything, anywhere, anytime. And I kind of think about it this way, that if I was struggling with a real food issue or addiction in my life, I was overweight and trying to lose some pounds, would it help me if I walked around every day with a maple glazed donut in my pocket? Now, that's my favorite donut. Others might have a different one. And I might be successful from time to time of avoiding that. But if it's constantly there and food is my issue, I'm going to eat the maple donut sometimes. And I think that's a reality for men and women who struggle, is that the cell phone, the smartphone has just become the outlet for their struggle. And part of it is just simply the access that we have is so prevalent that all the time. And I tell people, we're looking for solutions that really help us when we're in that bottom 5% of our day or our emotional mindset or our spiritual well-being. Because 95% of the time, if we're walking with the Lord, we're open with others, we may feel like, man, I'm doing well. I don't need these guardrails, or I don't need protection. But it's that 5% of your day when you felt rejection, or you feel alone, or you're just disillusioned and frustrated. And if the access to illicit content is as close as the phone in your pocket, once in a while, it's easy to stray. And so I think it really emphasizes on a very practical level, we have to be guarding not only our hearts and our minds, but we have to be guarding our phone and what we have access to, how we choose to access it. One of the things I would tell you is how frequently I hear from men that I do group with that social media is a trap for them. It's a rabbit hole that they can go down. And we might think of social media being more of a woman's thing that, women get caught up in scrolling. Well, I would say men do as well. And whether it's profile pictures or advertisements that come up, there's just clickbait type stuff that can start maybe not too too insidious or evil, but it's one step away from what we know we should be looking at, and then it becomes 2 steps and 3 steps, and men will say, man, I ended up back where I never want to go. And I just keep hearing them say the inroad was Facebook, it was Instagram, it was Twitter. And so I'm seeing we have to be very vigilant about what we have access to, so that when we're in, like I said, that low 5% of our day, how do we make wise, healthy, God-honoring choices? And sometimes it is about changing that level of access just so that we can get through those moments and get back to that place where we are making healthy decisions.
Yeah. So what does that look like, Nick? Thinking about, like, let's just say the cell phone, and you said limiting the access or guarding the access. What might be some things you would suggest to guys that are out there and saying, okay, if this is a struggle, what with a cell phone, what might they do?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that come to mind. It's good to practice having accountability software on your phone, on your devices, and not making an excuse to say, well, this one didn't work well. Or I get that a lot from men of, well, this one interfered with wanting to do this or that. And I say, man, if your integrity's on the line, do whatever it takes to figure it out, because there's a lot of good programs out there, whether it's Covenant Eyes, or accountable to you, or a new program we've been using a lot called Lead Me Not. Lead Me Not, you can customize even to say, I'm allowed to have this many minutes on a certain web page, but then it will alert my partners if I'm on, like, let's say Facebook, if I'm on more than 10 minutes, my partners get an instant alert saying, hey, Nick has been on Instagram more than 10 minutes. Maybe check in with him and see how he's doing. So I think starting with accountability software is just a place we should all have for that healthy accountability, but that also shouldn't be the only thing. I also know for a lot of men, they've simply made a choice that they don't access social media on their phone, partly because of that ease of access, that we want to be intentional that if we are on social media, there's value to it. It creates connection. There's ways we can interact with others. But I've had a lot of men say, if I only do that when I'm at my computer or at home, and my wife is there, then I'm being intentional in that use and not using it as an escape. And I think that's a good principle. And then I just encourage men, we've got a tool at Pure Desire we call the 3 circles tool that helps them identify what's my crash in the middle, what's that interior circle of the guardrails that I have, and then what's that outer circle? What are those healthy behaviors? And I think when it comes to our smartphones, that really is a key of asking the question, when I am down, or when I am bored, or when I am lonely, where do I go? Because if the answer is to my smartphone, it's going to be hard to make good choices. But if I have an answer, like I have a friend that I call, I have a worship song that I listen to, I have an activity that I engage in, if we know what we go to instead, that's going to be far healthier than just kind of reverting to the easiest outlet, which is wasting time on our phone. So those are a couple of principles that we talk to men about.
That's helpful. I know for me, I think it was 2 years ago now, I just got off of Twitter, and I'm not saying everyone has to get off X or whatever, or get rid of all of it.
Whatever name it's using now.
Whatever name it's using. I just knew for me that it was just a pure waste of time. And like you said, you can just go down trails. And so I just stopped, and it was hard. I mean, at first, but then, now I don't notice it at all. But I think you're right. Just some of those safeguards can be so helpful. I think the other thing I heard, which is so important, is for guys to know themselves. What's the danger zone for you? What's, like you said, is it when you're angry, alone, feel rejected, disillusioned? What are those situations, places, people, times of the day that are fire for you is important.
Yeah. One helpful tool there too can be, I've said to guys, if I were to tell you right now, and this is totally hypothetical, but if I were to tell you, you must right now go look at pornography, go do it, where would you go? And I think for a lot of men, they maybe think, oh, this website or that place. And I'd say, well, that's the very thing that you need to have a very detailed plan of. This is how I'm avoiding that exact route, because your brain, if that's what came to mind, like your brain is aware, that's where I would go. And I think sometimes we're holding on to a website, a social media account, whatever it might be. And it's so true. We need to know ourselves. We need to know our pattern. But if my brain knows that's kind of my outlet, if I really needed it, well, we need to figure out how to get rid of that outlet and make sure that if I was asked that question, you must go view pornography, our brain would at least pause for a few moments to go, well, I'm not even sure where I'd go. Yeah. I don't know that I have access. I don't know where to look. Like, well, that's a result there. That helps see that you're in a healthier place, that you don't have kind of this ready outlet that your brain is aware of. So maybe asking yourself that question today could be valuable, or to another man.
Are you looking for a Bible study that will forge a deep and lasting connection with other guys? Then the Basecamp Bible Study Series is for you. Basecamp is a series of studies that will guide your men through the scriptures, addressing core disciplines of the Christian faith, while challenging them to become authentic and committed followers of Jesus. Each lesson includes a digital study guide, teaching videos, and leader notes to help facilitate transformative discussions. Start your spiritual journey today with Basecamp. Visit noregretsmen.org/Basecamp. Again, that's noregretsmen.org/Basecamp.
Let's transition a little bit here, Nick. We have a lot of guys that listening that are small group leaders, and we hear from them a lot as far as the feedback and what they're dealing with in their small groups. And obviously, this is a big issue. As you think about a small group leader or just a leader in ministry to men, what are some of you're working with 5, 8 guys. What are some of the warning signs that you might see in one of your group members that he might be struggling? Anything that would, stand out there that might be helpful for the guys?
Yeah. Yeah, I think unfortunately part of that answer is it's not easy to identify. I go back to that stat we were talking about. If 51% of people say no one knows, part of the reason is because this is, I hate to say the word easy, but it's fairly easy to hide. You can shove it down and say, well, that was last night. That was a dumb thing. I'm not going to do that again. And then I go about my day and I act normal and I'm faith-filled and I know the Bible and I can pray well. Like, it's not always easy just to pick up on, oh, this guy's depressed or this guy's lonely. He must be struggling. Not some of the healthiest guys that you've seen probably have a story of pornography. And so that's part of the answer is you may not know. Now, I do think there are more obvious signs. Sometimes, if a guy is really seeming disengaged and disconnected in his wife, in his marriage, that's something to be aware of. If it does seem like they're continually kind of avoiding conflict and running to, you're aware they're on their phone a lot, they're on the internet a lot, there's typically, more to that story. And the other thing I think we may look for is when someone is frequently vague when it comes to how are you doing or how's your relationship with God, how's your prayer life, what are you struggling with? And their answers are always vague.
Yeah.
That often can indicate there's something there that they don't know how to talk about or maybe aren't ready to. And I think as we create a safe environment and build a healthy relationship, that may be an area that we could lean into and say, I've recognized that you have a difficult time answering this question. And would it be okay if we talked a little bit more about that? I would say to group leaders, honestly, this is an area you need to have the courage to ask about. And I would say not with a yes, no question of, are you struggling with pornography? Because if I am struggling and I'm already locked up in a little bit of minimization or denial, in that moment of kind of exposure, I might say no, just because I'm not ready to answer that question. And I was asked a yes, no question, well, no, I'm doing fine. Yeah. I think it's more helpful to consider that we're all men. We all probably have struggled with this to some degree. And so let's assume that this is something we're all working through. And so to ask a question like, how are you handling your sexual purity these days? What steps are you taking to deal with lust and pornography in your life? So to just invite those kind of conversations that shows someone, I care, I'm here for you. And if this is an area where you're battling, it's safe to bring up here. And I think too, if we're the leader asking that question, the more that we're able to self-reveal our progress in that area, and hopefully it's not a current struggle, but if we're able to say, man, this is something I've had to battle through. And I just want you to know that if you're in the midst of it still, let's do this together. Let's talk, let's be real. And as you invite that, I think then men who are in that category saying no one knows, they might begin to believe this could be a safe place to open up and be real about my struggle.
Yeah, let's camp out there just for a minute. I love what you said, because part of the context of answering the question, you said you want to develop a safe environment. And so let's just talk about what that safe environment looks like for us, for a small group. You mentioned being honest about your own struggle, taking the lead. You mentioned the idea of asking, not a yes, no, but I loved it. How are you handling your sexual purity these days? Yeah. Nick, what can a leader do to develop a safe environment for men to share?
Yeah.
Not just, about this issue maybe, but just about life as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we might think it's a given, but it's always necessary to reiterate that this is a confidential environment, that what you share here, we're going to hold as sacred among us and not go share with our spouses or other people in the church. What's shared here stays here. That really helps. And I think also when someone does step in and open up, whether it's about pornography or another struggle, the way that we react as a leader in a group is very, very important. If we react with, how could you, or what were you thinking, or what the Bible says, those kind of shame-inducing messages, and hopefully none of us would say it that way, but maybe other versions of it,
right?
Where when someone shares, they suddenly feel like the black sheep or a little bit ostracized. Well, that sets a tone for the group, versus if someone shares and we as a leader are the first to jump in and say, wow, thank you for sharing. I'm so proud of you for the courage that took to be real and honest with us. And I want you to know this is a safe place for that information. And we're going to hold that with you. We're here for you. How can we help? and that doesn't mean you're justifying or overlooking what maybe they've done. And the behavior may have real consequences, or a behavior may necessitate they take some steps. But it's the attitude of the group when it's shared that does, I think, help people go, oh, well, man, I shared some pretty dark stuff. And rather than kind of getting all weird and squeamish, the group really seemed to care and love on me and thank me. And because I remember that was my experience of being in a group for the first time when I was talking about pornography, as I shared some parts of my story and people thanked me for sharing, thanked me for being there. And not just the leader, but others in the group. It was such an odd experience of why are they thanking me? Like, but you came to understand, like, that was the point of the group, was to be real. And when someone chose to do that, that was celebrated. And so I think just the way we react to people sharing really sets the tone for others to open up and see that this really is a safe place.
Okay, so let's just take it to the next step. So there's a guy, you're talking, and he says, "Listen, I've been struggling in this area. What as a leader can I do to help another guy now with his struggle? Where do I point him? How do I walk with him? What does that look like?"
Yeah, well, I think expressing your support, I'm here for you. I'm not, this doesn't change the way I think of you. This doesn't change our relationship. I want to walk through this with you as best I can. I mean, that makes a world of difference for someone just to feel like they're not alone. And then I would say as a leader, it's important that you're sincere in following up on that. Some of my experience as a younger man, as I struggled and I would share with people and they would pray for me and say, "Man, I'm here for you." And then they wouldn't ever bring it up again. And I didn't know how to bring it up because I still felt a lot of shame around my behavior and it felt awkward. And if they didn't ask, I didn't tell in a lot of those relationships. And so I think for you as a leader, if you just have that courage every couple of weeks to circle back and say, "Hey, we talked about this and I want to know, how's it going? How can I pray for you? What steps are you taking?" And it shows that sincerity of, when I said I was here for you, I meant it. And that wasn't just a one-time thing that now we're going to ignore for the rest of our lives. Like, no, let's face this. And then I think there is some humility or maybe some freedom of knowing that as the leader or a pastor, a small group leader, you don't have to have all the answers. To be able to direct them towards groups like Pure Desire, to say, "Hey, I know there are ministries out there that have groups you could join, or maybe there is one at your church." I think being that bridge into healing community is important, because I've said in a lot of environments that first step into healing is the biggest and the hardest.
Yeah.
And so if a man has the courage to open up to you as a leader and say, "Hey, I've been struggling," they're kind of opening that door, and that step to actually face it, like in a group situation or with a counselor, that's a big step. And if you are a part of encouraging that, like, "Hey, I'd love to introduce you to our group leader," or, "Hey, I'd love to share with you the information we have about Pure Desire groups," right? We've got a wonderful godly counselor in town who's helped men walk through this. I wonder if you'd reach out to him. Man, that can be a game changer, because the thing I find that for most men and women that struggle with pornography, they're not aware of who can help them. They've been spending probably most of their time trying to avoid it and ignore it and not think about it.
Yeah.
But if as a pastor or group leader, you have a couple of resources in your back pocket, like Pure Desire groups, or a couple of good books you could recommend, a podcast, a counselor, it moves them towards healing resources. And then when you check in, you don't have to feel like you're solely responsible for their health. It's more to check in and say, "Hey, have you been able to engage in a group? Have you been able to listen to that podcast? Did you reach out to that counselor?" And getting them into some professional care or getting them around people that do this for a living might be your best strategy as a leader.
Yeah. I love that. That's so helpful. And I love the idea of it as a leader, thinking about it, knowing what are the resources out there. And, you might be a small group leader. And so just talk to your pastor about that and say, "Okay, what's available in the city that we live?" But especially when it comes to the counseling piece, but something like Pure Desire is available to anyone, anywhere, which is great. If a church does not have a small group or a ministry to help guys, what would you recommend, Nick? I know you guys have developed different things, but where would a church start to develop a ministry or a small group for men?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's really three options they can look into. I mentioned we have online groups at Pure Desire, and
Yep.
we've seen a number of times where men come to an online group so that they can get healing and freedom. And then the goal being, we're going to help send them back to their local church to help start the first group in the church. So
Okay.
engaging with an online group is the first option. Second, you may not have a group in your church, but maybe other churches around town do. And I would say, especially in this area, it's valuable to link arms with other churches. Um,
Hmm.
this is not a strategy to get other people to join your church. I would say, as a pastor, I had a number of men in my groups that came from other churches, and none of them started attending my church. It was like, no, you're from that church. Great. What brings us here isn't this church, it's this issue, and we're all looking to heal together. So
Yeah.
look to link arms with a church in your town that might have groups. And you could find on our website a list of churches in
Mm.
your area that have groups. That's the second option. And then the third option, we could equip you to start a group in your church. It really is not staff driven. It doesn't have to be leadership intensive. We've got the group leader training program. It's finding a capable volunteer that hopefully has some traction in their life, and equipping them with the tools and saying, man, we'd love to start a group here. And that's what we do at Pure Desire, is we help churches start groups. So if you don't have one,
Good.
reach out to us. We'd love to help you start it. And like I said, it doesn't have to be the pastor who leads it. It doesn't mean you're starting a whole new ministry initiative. It can be a fairly simple grassroots process just to get one group of men meeting around this topic, and we can help you do that.
Great. Oh, that's so helpful. And what material do you? I just saw on your website you said you had some new material called the Compassionate Warrior. Is that what the groups would normally go through, or would they go through something else now?
Yeah, the groups still for men go through the 7 pillars of freedom. And
Okay.
then we have for women, for the wives that are in the betrayal side, or been wounded by what their husband is doing, we have a group called Betrayal and Beyond. And then for women who have their own sexuality issues or addiction issues, we have a group called Unraveled. So those are kind of the 3 starting points. And so
Okay.
for men, 7 pillars of freedom. But yeah, last year, Dr. Ted Roberts finally completed a workbook he'd been developing for about 7 years, and we were able to print it as a follow-up study to the 7 pillars of freedom. So after men have gone through that first round, usually they're getting momentum, they're starting to experience some freedom, but it can be easy if they don't stay engaged in group to maybe drift back to old patterns.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's some new, we talk about healing being the layers of the onion. And sometimes you peel back that first layer and you find some freedom and growth and progress.
Yep.
But then men might come back after another year and say, man, I'm stuck again. What happened? And they think they've reverted. And it's not just that they've reverted. It's actually maybe that some deeper stuff is coming up about where they're finding their identity or their value or their worth. And it's creating that need to cope in an unhealthy way. And so the Compassionate Warrior kind of takes the principles of 7 pillars of freedom and goes to a deeper level.
Okay.
Helps them understand more how to heal relationships in their life, how to understand who they are in Christ, and to really begin to build a godly legacy in moving forward. So it's kind of that part 2 study after someone's been through 7 pillars. So if anyone listening, if your church has used 7 pillars for a number of years and you've had guys talk about, well, what else can I do? The Compassionate Warrior is a great next step for those men.
Great. Nick, I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. This has been so helpful, and I know it's going to be a huge help to the guys that are listening, for them personally as well as to those they're leading. Could you just, to close, just tell us where the guys can get some of the information that we've been talking about? Where do they go? And we'll put it in the show notes, so it'll all be there. But you just want to mention that for them?
Yeah. Our website is just puredesire.org, and everything is found there. We've got a groups tab. You can find either groups online or search for a local group. There's kind of the 2 options there, and the different types of groups. I would also mention we have a free resources page. So we have a weekly podcast that a number of people, thousands of people are benefiting from, a bi-weekly blog that comes out, and then a number of the tools, like when I mentioned the 3 circles tool, that's called the Relapse Prevention Plan, the RPP. That's a free tool on our webpage. So that's under the free resources tab. You can find all of those things that might be a supplement to what you're already doing. Because I know a number of churches have accountability groups or a men's program, and they might feel like, man, we're just looking to supplement some of what we do. They might find what they need there under those free resources.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Well, like I said, we'll put all those, we'll list them in the show notes and just encourage guys to go right to your website, whether they want to get into a group, online group, whether they want to go through the leader training or just look at some of those resources, podcasts, things like that. That's fantastic. So, well, Nick, thanks so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. What you're doing for men, for the local church, and can't be more proud of you and grateful for you. And just keep up the good work, would you? Keep up the good work, because you're a huge addition to the church as far as the impact that you're making.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. Glad to be a part of it, and hope that my story and the journey I had to go through can continue to help others, and then that their story will be what helps the next person, because I think that's how God brings freedom, is when we're real about our story and we invite others into that process. So glad for the small part that I can play in that.
Good. Well, on behalf of Nick and myself, we want to thank you for taking time to listen. Hopefully you've been encouraged, and our prayer would be that you would take the things that you heard and not just hear them, but apply them into your setting, into your context, that you might more effectively minister to the guys in your sphere of influence. And so this has been encouragement. We always appreciate it if you pass it on to the other men that you're working with, the other leaders, other small group leaders in your church and in your sphere, and look forward to talking with you next week.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.menwithnoregrets.org/podcast.
Life Camp USA is a nonprofit organization that mentors young men who have lost a father due to military or law enforcement service. Life Camp USA provides an all-expenses-paid, week-long, world-class camp experience that inspires, equips, and navigates these fatherless young men through some of life's toughest moments. Life Camp USA's mentors serve grieving families by helping these sons establish healthy identities, values, character, and goals without the crucial aid of a father in their life. To learn more about Life Camp's mission, visit lifecampusa.org. Again, that's lifecampusa.org.